We are going to get started. Thank you all so much for coming. For those of you who haven't discovered them yet, the restrooms are around to the back and straight through those doors. Feel free during this presentation to get up, go get yourself a drink, get refreshments, stand up in the back if you need to, and please ask questions. This is definitely something where you can get up and get yourself refreshments if you need to. My name is Isabel Hardesty. I'm the Executive Director of Shore Rivers, and welcome to our State of the Chester. This is the third of 5 State of the River events that we do every year, not when the pandemic is happening, but we highly value bringing our water quality expertise to you, to the communities that we serve. So we host 5 of these State of the River events all over our geography, starting in St. Michael's and then down to Cambridge. This is our 3rd event here in Chestertown. We will follow up with Sassafras event up in Betterton next week, and then conclude at the Chesapeake Bay Environmental Center in Graysonville. So we bring our water quality expertise to you so that you, the community, can learn about our water quality trends, hear from your local experts, your river keepers, your Shore Rivers staff, and learn about the water quality of our waterways, and is it safe to swim in the water? What are things that we can do to help improve our water quality? And these kinds of things that we hear from you, our community, all the time. So we're really happy to be back in person, and happy to be back in this wonderful space hosted by the Center for Environment and Society at Washington College. So thank you, Washington College staff who are here with us tonight. The Center for Environment and Society is an absolutely wonderful partner for us, giving us high quality, top quality students. We currently have 3 Washington College graduates on our staff. We really like to hire interns and staff from Washington College, and we have lots of programs that you're going to hear more about from Annie and Darren later tonight. So Washington College is a huge, very valuable partner for us in this work. So, I'm sorry, I'm getting used to this thing. Hold it lower. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So I want to get a sense of who is in the room tonight. I know people love this section. This is the section where you get to stand up and raise your hand. So if you are a governing board member or a watershed advisory board member, could you please stand up or raise your hand so that we can all see you? These are your community members who are on our boards. Thank you. And if all of our staff in the room could please raise your hand. These are your local experts. These are the people to talk to with your burning questions. If you are a swim tester, a water quality tester, an SAV watcher, an MGO grower, a tree steward, or any other kind of volunteer for Shore Rivers, could you please raise your hand? Woo! Thank you. It is because of the people who raised their hand tonight and all of you who came to this event and are in the room with us. That is how we are able to do this work. We're a community-based advocacy, restoration, education, activism, citizen scientist organization. We have 24 staff, but you all amplify our voice by hundreds and hundreds. So thank you for being a part of this movement. And I want to introduce you to your speakers tonight, your local experts. I will start with Annie Richards, your Chester Riverkeeper. Annie comes to us from 10 years of experience at Echo Hill Outdoor School, where she was an educator, she did work on development and fundraising, and she was a captain of the famous Echo Hill boats. So even though Annie has been Chester Riverkeeper with us for a little bit over a year, she is by no means new to the Chester River and is an expert on water quality and in the Chester River itself. And she is also Captain Annie Richards, a merchant mariner with a U.S. Coast Guard 100-ton license, so she knows her way around boats. Thank you. Director of Community Engagement. Darren has been with us for about 3 years, and she came to us with a lot of experience in development and community organizing. And anyone who knows Darren knows that she is a total community organizer and energizer, because she is the Energizer Bunny, and she is amazing at gathering people and inspiring them to do good work. So we're really happy to hear from both Annie and Darren tonight. These are your local experts, so help me welcome them.
All right, let's make sure this mic is on. All right, so thank you, Isabel, and thank you all for being here tonight. Tonight we will be talking about the state of the Chester River. Oh, did I say it? The Chester. Sorry. Anyways, Shore Rivers, we have our mission loud and clear. You've heard us say it many times over. Our mission is to restore Eastern Shore waterways through science-based advocacy, education, and restoration. And we do this through many different departments: our Riverkeeper department, education department, agriculture and restoration department, our community engagement department. So we have so many full-time, passionate staff members focused on this work, and all of you that are supporting that.
And, you know, Isabel did a beautiful job of welcoming you here. I just want to reiterate, I'm like a little overwhelmed by how awesome it is to be in rooms with people again. We're so grateful to you all for being here. We could not do this without all of you. We couldn't do this without Ten Eyck Brewery, whose amazing Riverkeeper beer, if you have not already sampled, you must. Scott Budden's gorgeous Orchard Point oysters. Woo! Yeah! Bob Ramsey at the Finishing Touch for producing our beautiful project poster, which is in this room, showing the incredible array of restoration projects we've gotten in the ground in our watersheds. And I also want to talk a little bit about the way that we're able to do this work of building a future worth inhabiting. One of the most critical ways we do that is by including as many voices as possible, right? Clean water is for everyone. These rivers need all of our voices. So behind me is a photo of our recent first environmental justice community convening. We were able to gather people working in youth development, in immigration, in social justice together to talk about our shared values, right? To talk about what it is that we all want to see for our communities and our waterways on the Eastern Shore, and then to start thinking about how we do that. We can't do it without including everyone, so this work is critically important. And we're really glad for the support of these organizations and organizations in this community, like the Menaries Dream Alliance and Kent Sustainable Housing and Rebuilding Together, some of whom are represented here tonight, and you'll get to hear a little more about that collaboration later.
So let's talk about our watershed. There are two major ways that land pollution is entering our waterway, the Chester, through the watershed. We have erosion, surface runoff that's happening through soil, and then we have groundwater, so water seeping down through our water table over many years and then entering our rivers. And we have many different land uses, but on the Eastern Shore, of course, being a rural community, 60% of our land use is tied up in agriculture. So a lot of our restoration work and a lot of our focus tends to work with farmers and agricultural land across the Eastern Shore, and that's especially true on the Chester. So wastewater systems, you know, when we work in different towns and different communities with urban runoff, we're working on stormwater issues, sewer capacity, wastewater treatment plants, and that goes, you know, for municipal and industrial. So whether that's a factory, whether that's a residential wastewater treatment system. And then we have our residential runoff. We have septic systems, especially in a rural community where there's so many different septic systems here in subdivisions that were once farmland and things like that that are not connected to a town. Turf lawns with nitrogen, fertilizer, and pesticides to keep those turf lawns looking green maybe. Those are all surface pollutants that can end up in our waterways. And then stormwater from those residential neighborhoods. And then we also have climate change as a backdrop to all of this, where we're experiencing sea level rise and increased storm activity as impacts from that temperature change. So how do we monitor all of these pollutants that are coming into our waterways? So we do this through several different programs. One is our tidal water quality program. And we test for temperature, pH, salinity, dissolved oxygen, turbidity or clarity, nitrogen, phosphorus, and algae at 12 sites on the Chester River, starting all the way up at CH6 near Crumpton. And then we go as far down as CH1, which you can see where the mouth of Reed Creek and the Corsica and Grayson Creek and Langford all converge. And then we have test points on all of our major tributaries to the Chester. We sample those locations twice a month, and we sample those April through October following MTAC protocols. MTAC stands for the Mid-Atlantic Tributary Assessment Coalition. So we follow their protocols strictly so that our programs are scientifically rigorous, and they also help inform how we analyze our data, which feels amazing to say. Here's all of our data from 2021. And again, following those MTAC protocols, what you're seeing here on this chart with percentages is not the way, the unit of measurement that we collect when we're out sampling. So if I'm sampling nitrogen, it's milligrams per liter. If I'm measuring salinity, it's parts per thousand. What the MTAC protocols help us do is convert those into percentage scores that are more easily digestible for a broader public. So when you see that Langford has a summer dissolved oxygen of 63%, you can read that and know that 63% of the times that Langford Creek was sampled, it met acceptable water quality threshold standards. So using these MTAC protocols, we're able to generate a grade for each of these. So you can see each of our tributaries. You know, we have the main stem of the Chester, our main tributaries, and then I've even broken it into upper, middle, and lower Chester. And you can see pretty clearly where our glaring issues are. And that's phosphorus, clarity, and algal blooms. So those are the big affectants of our overall grade throughout the year. And then I want to make sure as we go through the rest of our data and what trends have been looking like for the Chester that we remember a few takeaways. So what we know from this year's data and from many years of previous data is that water quality declines upstream. And that's because you have a higher land to water ratio. And phosphorus and clarity scores are usually linked because phosphorus bonds to soil and sediment. So when you have surface erosion and lots of sediment coming into our waterways, that usually means that we're going to have a higher phosphorus score. And unfortunately, a smaller amount of phosphorus can do a great deal more damage than the same amount of nitrogen. So that's something to keep in mind. A note about groundwater. So phosphorus and sediment usually come into our waterways through surface runoff, but when we're talking about groundwater, 70% of our nitrogen comes into our rivers through groundwater, so those legacy nutrients. And those current readings that we're seeing in 2021 are the result, that water quality is the result of land practices that were 20 to 50 years old. So we're just now, this year, starting to see impacts of major environmental efforts at a federal level, like the Clean Water Act. So the Clean Water Act, this is the 50th anniversary of this law, and this was the first major environmental law that did something to set a standard for water quality protection. In its creation, its objective was to restore and maintain the chemical and physical, biological integrity of our nation's water. It recognized that it is every state's responsibility to reduce pollution coming into its waterways, and that it needed, as a federal government, to provide those states with resources to do that job. And so on the Eastern Shore, the Clean Water Act helps us, especially when we're talking about point source pollution. So those wastewater treatment plants, those factories, those industrial and municipal point source polluters, the Clean Water Act gives us an array of tools to use to expect better from those point source polluters. But non-point source pollution, like septic systems and more generic land use and loose sediment on farmland, those types of things are non-point source polluters. And we're still waiting for major tools to come down the pike from the federal government to help us deal with that. So over on the Eastern Shore, while the Clean Water Act has been a huge game changer, we still have work to do. So, water quality trends over the years. I'm going to orient you a little bit to our chart here. So this is a trend chart showing you water quality on the main stem of the Chester from 2015 to 2021. So on this axis here, you can see the dates. The 0 to 100% is just like we saw on the 2021 chart. So if you see a dot at 30%, that means that 30% of the time that tributary met the acceptable threshold for water quality. And the scale is up here for reference. And so you can see over the past, and the other thing to note about trends is, while it's great that we can build this trend lines get a lot more impactful and effective that we can learn from as we get decades of data. So Shore Rivers is working toward building that set, but you'll have to give us a couple years. And the other thing to say is that while these tidal trends are incredibly important to us to help facilitate our work, what is also invaluable is that we have decades of non-tidal testing data that was provided to us from Chester testers and decades of volunteer samplers that gave us context within our watershed to analyze this tidal quality. So that's been incredibly helpful, and we'll go into what that means in a little bit. So you can see over the last 5 years, we have had a downward trend in nitrogen. Again, 70% of this nitrogen is coming from groundwater. So, you know, the impacts that we're seeing on this nitrogen are things that happened a long time ago, and restoration projects are usually really effective at curbing sediment runoff. And so then you can look at the kind of upward trend that we're seeing in phosphorus and clarity here. So that's encouraging to see. Something else that I want to draw your attention to is these two heat maps over here. These heat maps are actually from 2019, which you can tell from our trend chart was actually a more positive spike for us in water quality. And if you look at the top chart, you'll see that's for nitrogen. And you'll see that the Kent County side of the Chester, the lower Chester, is actually quite green. And you'll see that the trends of yellow, orange, red tend to stay on the Queen Anne's County side and the upper Chester, where the ratio of land to water is much higher. Compare that to our phosphorus slide, where yellow, orange, red, those poorer scales are kind of equally distributed around the Chester. And we're going to kind of go into why that might be in this next slide. So these two tributaries, Southeast Creek and Corsica, are on the Queen Anne's County side. From decades of data that helped Chester River Association produce the Chester River Watershed analysis plan in 2016, we were able to have in-depth studies about the soils that were in each county. Queen Anne's County, if anyone lives there, it's no surprise to you that your soil is very sandy. And so water travels through it easily, and therefore groundwater containing nitrogen that doesn't need to bond to anything can flow quite quickly through that water. So it's easy to see a higher nitrogen trend on Queen Anne's County side year after year. You can also see that the Corsica has a much lower starting point than some of the other rivers when we look at our trend charts. And they're kind of holding steady, even a positive trend on their data. And part of the challenge that the Corsica faces is that it's a very shallow river with slow-moving water, and it has 3 main tributaries that drain into it that all test really high in phosphorus. So you have a lot of challenges to overcome just from the natural landscape of the river and the way that that flows. So, but we are seeing an increased trend, which is a positive thing to see. So in Kent County, you'll remember from a previous slide with the heat maps that kind of lower grade, that yellow, orange, red heat map was more evenly spread when we jumped to phosphorus. And that is because Kent County has very clay-heavy soils. Water doesn't want to percolate down through the soil table, and so therefore surface runoff with phosphorus and sediment are more prevalent, and so you're going to get a more even distribution of that phosphorus pollution. So that is just one area of our water quality that we test for, but there's a whole nother area of water quality that we test for that has broader purpose.
So we call this sort of set of programs Swimmable Shore Rivers. This is part of what we're talking about, the future we want to live in, right? Swimmable, fishable, abundant waterways. This program we believe that access to clean water is an essential right for everyone. And that access means a couple of different things. It means you can actually get to the water, right? You can go to the water. It also means that you have access to information about whether it's safe to get into your waterways. So this program, one of the things this program does is focus on getting people to the water. So I'm going to talk about that part and leave the science to Annie. We've got over 85 miles of shoreline on the Chester. There are only 12 public access points. It's not enough. It's not enough, right? We want our kids splashing their feet in these waters. We want people to be able to experience falling in love with these rivers so that they'll be sitting in rooms like this, learning more about them and caring about them. You won't protect what you don't love, and you won't fall in love if you can't set a toe in these waterways. Only 10 out of 12 of those access points are boat ramps. Only one is really a swimming beach. So if you don't have a car or your own boat, you don't have the means to interact with our waterways. You're not recreating on our waterways. And our riverkeepers are fierce defenders of public access. We were deeply proud to stand with Monera's Dream Alliance this year as they gained access to the American Legion property, where kids who have grown up in this rural community, mostly young Black people, have been in, nature deficit. They have not gotten to experience the outdoors despite being surrounded by it. And now they have this incredible opportunity on the waterfront to get their feet wet, learn how to canoe, learn how to kayak. So we're thrilled about that. And our riverkeepers are out every day looking for ways they can increase access.
Yeah, and we actually, as much as that has been a really uplifting win on the Chester for access, we recently had an unfortunate loss. Anyone who lives in Queen Anne's County might know that last week the Queen Anne's County Commissioners voted to terminate a public easement access at a waterfront community on Ken Island. This pier was used by many families for sustenance fishing, and it was in and nearby a community that didn't want the extra traffic, didn't want the extra trash and things that may have been brought with that activity. This is something that Shore Rivers spoke out about heavily in 2020 when Tim Trumbauer was the riverkeeper, and it came up for debate at a commissioners meeting last week, which we submitted comments for, and unfortunately the vote was pushed through, and that public access is now terminated, and we have one less fishing pier on Ken Island, which is not a very walkable community to begin with. So we strive to work for more public access, and we're working to work with our commissioners, with our governing bodies, with any partner we can to figure out where we can instill more functional, equitable, walkable public access points for all of our community members to enjoy.
And we know we can solve the problems, right? We know public access demand skyrocketed. We saw it during COVID. It's a public health issue. We need access to outdoor spaces. And so if that brings increased difficulty, then let's solve the problems. Let's not bar the access.
Yeah, absolutely. And so access to our waterways is not just physical, it's also informational. When people do recreate in our waterways, they should know whether the water is safe for them to recreate in, for their children to recreate in, for their dogs. And so we have a bacteria monitoring program made possible by our incredible swim tester volunteers, many of whom are here tonight. What we test for when we're testing for bacteria is enterococci, fecal enterococci. So this is something that's coming from nutrients, fecal matter, poop. When we're talking about nitrogen, phosphorus, and bacteria, that's really what it all comes back to. And so this is another indicator, not just for human health for us to get out into communities who want to be recreating, but it's also another parameter that we can be tracking to see how much nutrients is coming into our waterways. So where we test, this is last year's data. We had 11 sites on the Chester last year. We get to add 2 more this year, one on Ken Island at Jackson Creek Landing and another at Rosin Creek. You can see that the results from the Chester River of last year, any red dot that you see on the screen here, that's a site that passed less than 60% of the time. And when we say passed or failed, we're talking about the EPA's safe swimming guidelines. So we're following the EPA's guidelines when we make decisions on whether something is passing a threshold or not. Any yellow dot is something that passed 60 to 94% of the time, and then we didn't have any sites last year that passed more than that. So this is clearly something that we need to be tracking, that folks should be aware of. this is information when we make this information public. This is information that sailing camps, YMCA camps, children's organizations, so many different organizations around our watershed are checking our website on the regular to stay updated about this information, and so are all of you as individuals. We have, in 2021 alone, the Chester River sites had over 17,000 views on the swim guide, which is a huge amount. So this is clearly information that you all want to know, and we're happy to provide that. So thanks to our swim testers, we have volunteers that go out every Thursday to collect water samples that are tested in our labs, Memorial Day through Labor Day, and then we are able to disseminate that information weekly on Fridays in time for weekend recreation. So what do we do with all this data? We post it on the swim guide, and we also are able to look at trends and start to make some deductions from all of this data we've been gathering. So this chart here is all the data we have from all of our rivers, from all the years that we've been monitoring bacteria. And the number one trend that I want you to take away from this data is that when it rains, our bacteria levels spike. So you can see on the left, it's your left. On the left, you can see data about when we had a major rain event within 24 or 48 hours of a test. And then on the right is no rain event. And then you can also see the tide, whether the tide was incoming, outgoing, or slack. So 45% of the samples taken within 48 hours of a rain event during a low tide failed. You can see from these red bars that your chances of a site failing essentially double when it rains. And then the chances of it doubling compound if you're having that outgoing tide because you're receiving water from a higher land to water ratio. So those are things to keep in mind. Even if you don't have access to your phone or to the internet before you're out recreating in the water, you can ask yourself, which way is the tide going? When did it last rain? And that can help you make some pretty informed decisions about what the water quality might be like at that time during the summer. And so general rules to follow: don't swim after a major storm event, don't swim with any open cuts or wounds, always wash after swimming, and check your swim guide regularly, or your Riverkeeper's Facebook or Instagram page. Okay, let's pause and recap. That's a lot of data, that's a lot of things that we just talked about. And these are the main takeaways we want you to remember. Nutrient and sediment pollution damaging our rivers. We know that this pollution is coming from within our own watershed, and we also know that restoration programs work. Something that we haven't talked much about is climate change and what climate change is doing to threaten those restoration projects and the communities who live here.
I almost didn't include this slide. You guys have seen so many images like this. It's exhausting, and I'm not trying to, continue to make you despondent. Quite the opposite, actually. But we wanted to talk about climate change and what it looks like on a municipal scale. We know this is happening, right? We see this in our own streets, in our own backyards. And if you haven't already played with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA's tool for sea level rise imaging, it is frightening and fascinating in equal measure. This is Chestertown, just at mean high water now, right? Here's our current state of affairs. And keep in mind that right now, we see flooding. This would be mean high water with 2 feet of sea level rise. Again, not after a storm event. 2 feet is not, we feel pretty confident we're gonna see 2 feet, guys. This isn't the nightmare catastrophe scenario. This would be 4 feet of sea level rise. And I know you all know this, but I'm learning how to talk about it with people, and I wanna kind of arm you with this. For some of you, your house is under there, right? For the rest of us, it's hard to imagine what it feels like. It looks like a little bit of coastline loss, but it is a tremendous loss to our communities and qualities of life, right? There's no beach anymore. There's no waterfront now. If houses and infrastructure and oil tanks are underwater there, right, it's all gone. And Chestertown is not the most vulnerable, but to think about the change to our community if we let that happen is really staggering. And what would be required of us to act at this point to try to get the infrastructure in place that we need rather than to act urgently now.
And so some of the programs that we do, because we know that town planning, county planning, this is going to be a major tool for preparing and for mitigating sea level effects and climate change effects. So one of the programs that Shore Rivers was proud to have wrapped up a few years ago is our Chestertown Stormwater Management Plan. This was written in 2019. It was funded through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. You can head to our website to view the plan, and you can follow a link to this lovely ArcGIS map that was created for us. Actually, the intern that created it for us was a Washington College intern. She's in the room tonight. She's right over there. And so we did this in partnership with the GIS lab at Washington College and with Washington College students. So this is a fantastic project, and if any of you are curious to explore it, it highlights the over 30 projects for green infrastructure we've proposed to Chestertown to start mitigating stormwater runoff, helping water drain more slowly through our soil tables instead of flooding streets, disrupting impervious surface, adding urban tree canopy, adding bioswales, bioretention units, and preparing for a more resilient future, which Chestertown and so many small historic towns on the Eastern Shore need to be doing. It's by design that Chestertown sheds its water so readily into the Chester River. In the 1700s, that was kind of the goal, because that's how everyone got rid of their wastewater. And now we want to try and figure out how we can slow that down, keep the water in place. And green infrastructure is a really valuable tool to help towns like Chestertown do this.
And so we're talking about kind of two very related problems, right? So sea level rise and precipitation increase. And as our river rises, there's less room for stormwater to leave our towns, right? So this is also just, again, interesting science and a way to help us think about it. We know this intuitively. We know we're getting more rain, right? Do you also know that our growing season here has increased by more than 30 days over the last century? That means 30 fewer frost days. We also have 30 warm summer nights, and I've learned that what is difficult about that is that warm summer nights are not resting nights. So most living things need nights cool enough to biologically rest. And if you've ever tossed and turned on a hot night, you know what this feels like. It's the same for insects and for songbirds. And our plants need cool. So as all of this is happening, there's more insect pressure, there's more soggy water pressure, and we are working on solutions on the landscape scale for some of these challenges. So this is an exciting slide that I will not be able to spend enough time on to do it justice. Shore Rivers puts millions of dollars of large-scale restoration projects in the ground every year. So you'll see here a farm restoration project that's helping to treat water from those wastewater ponds that you see. That's a dairy farm. We also work with the Center for Environment and Society and the Natural Lands Project to do these beautiful restoration projects that bring habitat, wetlands, buffers to absorb stormwater, right? They do all of the things. They have the co-benefits of being habitat while they're treating stormwater. My family farm is lucky enough to have a couple of those natural lands projects now. So come visit. And coming soon in the Chester, you should check our website for details about 3 big restoration projects, both on Southeast Creek rather, and Morgan, some of our impaired waterways, as you saw earlier. Okay, now we're sort of wrapping up what Shore Rivers has done and talking about what you all in this room can do tonight. So raise your hand if you have participated in the River-Friendly Yards program or done any river-friendly practice in your yard, like planted natives, yes, rain gardens, oh my gosh, look at this crowd. I love it. So you know about this. If you don't already have this booklet, you can pick one up tonight. But these are all practices that absorb and treat polluted runoff and that have all of these incredible co-benefits, right? Habitat for birds and pollinators and humans, and also placemaking and mental health. And so we love this program, and we particularly love how it helps us activate our partnerships. So as I mentioned earlier, we are seeing incredible value in reaching out and partnering with organizations that have similar values. And this is some of the ways that we're doing it. This is an amazing planting project at Sumner Hall by the young men of the Rising Suns Mentorship Program. Riverkeeper Zach Kelleher, who designed and helped install a yard for a rebuilding together client. The first, but not last, Kent-attainable house, which now has native plantings. And the garden I could seeds garden, that's just my favorite photo ever, a small person planting a plant. And a rain garden at St. Paul's. So congregations, schools, your businesses, anywhere that has land can participate in the dignity of stewardship and the joy of growing things and cultivating hope.
So a program that started last fall that pairs really nicely with our River Friendly Arts program is our Tree Stewards volunteer program. And the Tree Stewards came about with a partnership through the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, and it's a way for us to get more native tree canopies in our urban and suburban areas across the shore. We know we have a lot of work to do with repopulating the Eastern Shore with trees. As a heavily agricultural and farming community, we have large spaces devoid of trees, and so working in our urban spaces as well as our rural spaces is incredibly important for so many reasons. When we shade impervious surface, we are cooling down those hot solar energies that are heating our water as it rushes down into our waterway. When those hot geysers of water go into our rivers, we're exploding oxygen levels, we're damaging SAV and critters that are living in our water there. And so that helps to mitigate that temperature change. It's increasing carbon sequestration, it's holding soils in place, it's improving water quality, increasing biodiversity, and it's increasing quality of life for local residents. It's lowering your energy bills, it's increasing your land value. So urban trees are incredibly important and useful, and sometimes can be hard to get in the ground, because when we're working in communities, lots more people have more opinion and say over a smaller space, and we're working with lots of different governing bodies to get it done. So luckily, we have 40 new tree steward volunteers that are now equipped with knowledge from the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, and you can become a tree steward too. The way you become a tree steward is you complete an online training course. There's 4 sessions where you'll learn about tree biology, soil health, planting site assessing, planting techniques, as well as canopy care and maintenance, and then community organizing and outreach skills. And we're actually working with our tree steward volunteers across all 4 watersheds this year, thanks to funding from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, to plant 300 urban and suburban trees across our waterways. And so we're visiting community spaces, reaching out to town councils, to churches, to community centers, so that we can get more trees in public parks, community spaces, and improve quality of life and improve water quality. So if you all have areas in your neighborhoods, in your towns, that you think deserves more trees, please email us, get in contact, because we have tree stewards ready to assess those sites and create planting plans, which is really exciting. So another program that we spend a lot of time on that's vitally important, not only for water quality, but also resiliency against climate change, is restoring submerged aquatic vegetation, our fancy word for underwater bay grasses. So SAV benefits, the habitat they provide for young fish, crabs, and critters is just invaluable. They are an incredibly efficient carbon sink. I actually read recently that an acre of SAV, of submerged aquatic grasses, is a more efficient carbon sink than that same acre of rainforest. So it's doing a lot of work for us. And then it also bolsters shoreline resiliency. How many folks have seen shoreline erosion because of heightened wave action and wind action because we have increased storm activity? Well, large beds of SAV can break up, this is getting a little echoey, can break up that wave activity, and that can help protect your shoreline. And then, of course, we have nutrient absorption, and they trap that floating sediment, allow it to settle down, and you get incredible quality. These are both pictures of SAV I found kayaking in the Chester, and any of us who recreate in the Chester know that clarity is not what we're famous for. But it's incredible when you're out hunting for these SAV beds, and you're looking, left and right, and you think, gosh, the bed should be here, and you can't see more than a foot and a half down, and then you're over top of it, and just like that, you're seeing 4 or 5 feet down, sandy bottoms, you're seeing a biodiversity of animals, and you think, this is what it's supposed to look like. And it does exist right now. You get out there and you're there to see it. So this chart here in the middle is showing our SAV restoration goals that are set for us from the Chesapeake Bay program. So you can see what the acreage of SAV per river, so the yellow is the Chop Tank, purple is Eastern Bay, Miles, and Y rivers, orange is Chester, and blue is Sassafras. So, you know, we've had growth and fluctuation in our amounts of SAV over the years, definitely. And where we're trying to get by 2035 is outlined by those stars. So on the Chester, we're trying to get to just over 3,000 acres of SAV. Right now, we're at about 1,100, so we're making progress, but we still have a lot of work to do. And one of the ways that we can do that, make those differences and achieve those goals, we do that through a volunteer program called SAV Watchers. We have SAV Watchers here in the crowd tonight. And those SAV Watchers can paddle out to suspected areas of grass beds. And once we can take the data to confirm that bed's existence, we can submit that to the Chesapeake Bay program, and it becomes a protected area for at least 5 years, which is a really powerful tool for us. And then they can also help us identify large thriving beds for our turbulator project.
You guys, if there's one word you take with you tonight,
It's the
let it be
turbulator. Yeah. So the turbulator is a relatively new restoration program for us. Last summer was our first endeavor. This is another partnership that we're so excited about with Center for Environment and Society at Washington College. The turbulator is housed by the CES building on the Riverfront campus. We're also in partnership with Anne Arundel Community College, who has been turbulating for decades now, and Maryland's DNR. So this project has been funded by the Chesapeake Bay Trust. And essentially, we go out with many volunteers to sustainably harvest from large established grass beds. We usually harvest between 8 and 25 bushel baskets of grass material. We bring it back to Washington College, allow the grasses to after ripen, which is a more scientific way of saying rot. And then we process them through our turbulator, which is a glorified jacuzzi that mimics wind and wave and current action and helps us to separate the seeds from the plant. Then we are able to process those seeds by hosing them down through a series of mesh bins, and then we suspend those seeds in a salinity solution for 6 months over the winter, and we are just now out in our waterways this month planting over 14 million seeds that we were able to process last summer, which is very exciting.
Okay, so I know you've heard it and you also do it. There are so many ways to get involved. Volunteer, become a member, sponsor a bacteria site. That's a cool new opportunity to make sure that we're able to test a site that you care about. Plan a river-friendly yard, foster some oyster spat with our Marylanders Grow Oysters program. And then another one I want to leave you with is be a stubborn optimist. I had a friend text me on the way here to say, I was just reading about deforestation, and I have a sincere question. How are you not depressed all the time in your line of work? And he deserves a longer and more sincere answer, but you have to cultivate stubborn optimism. To me, there's no other choice, right? We know we have work to do. We can't lie down, and the future isn't written yet. The future isn't written yet for Bjorn, or Camillo, who's here tonight, or my girls, right? My daughters don't know what that future is yet. We are inventing it as we go. So building that future that we want to inhabit is our greatest goal, our greatest challenge right now. So cultivate that optimism, help each other, remember to be joyful as you go.
Yeah. The last thing that I'll leave you all with is one of the best things you can do for the Chester is to get out and explore the Chester whenever you can. It is incredible the amount of life, biodiversity, and beauty that you can see any day on the Chester in spite of all of the pollution and challenges that we just talked about we are facing. And if you all get out and cherish the Chester that we have, Shore Rivers promises to continue to work for the river that you deserve. So thank you all. Thank you all.